Beware Romulans bearing gifts.
Hi, this is Eric.
And this is Caleb.
Welcome back. It's another unexpected Romulans bearing gifts. This is officially episode 83. And because it's unexpected, no one knew we were going to do this episode today, including ourselves. So, I finished the Lower Decks entire series recently, and I practically binged most of season 4 and all of season 5, the final season. And I couldn't stop. And I kept seeing the countdown as I was going along, like 12 episodes remaining, 11, 10, 9. And it went so fast because I was just enjoying it. And as far as this, we've never done this on RBG, right? Lower Decks.
Nope. It's one of the last remaining ones we haven't covered.
Oh, wait. What else is remaining besides this?
Well, there's going to be that new one coming out soon, but I think this was, the last one currently. So.
Okay. And yeah, it just, I never felt as motivated before since the show's been out. And we've discussed it offline, here and there, like our general broad feelings about Lower Decks, but we've never got into it on an episode level, whether it was on the podcast or not. So here we go. And we are jumping into season 3, episode 6, Hear All, Trust Nothing. So this happened really quickly, coming together to do this discussion today. And so I did not have a lot of time to really think about which episode I wanted to select. And there's a bunch of memorable ones throughout this entire show. But because I had limited time, and it was difficult, not only because I had limited time, but some of the good episodes rely on seeing a previous episode, possibly from a different season. And so I didn't want to necessarily accidentally pick one of those. That's what made it more difficult. And so I just went with something that I vaguely remembered that I was pretty sure was a standalone episode. And then I guess you, Caleb, could probably guess the other reason why I chose it from the mix.
Yeah, and I feel like this episode came up a little while ago. How I can't remember if it was when you guys were planning to put together your DS9 one. You mentioned something about Lower Decks doing a DS9 thing, or I can't remember when it came up, but I knew that it was in this show. And so when I saw this was what it was going to be today, I was like, oh, that's kind of exciting to bring me back for this. Because it's been a long damn time since I watched any Lower Decks. So
I hope it works out that way. So what did you think, Caleb? I know it's been a while for you just to even watch Lower Decks. What did you think of this one?
This one. It's a little bit hard to say for sure. Overall, I'd say I'm leaning towards, I definitely enjoyed it. But it felt very slight to me. And it reminds me of some of the early Lower Deck stuff that I saw where I was kind of like, oh yeah, I can see the kernels of stuff I like here. They're clearly these people who are making are Star Trek fans, and they get in some fun little bits. But the comedy for me just doesn't really feel like it hits enough for me to... I would almost wish it wasn't there. I think in terms of the animation, in terms of this cast of characters, I enjoy them. But I just feel like relying on the humor, I feel like they could do more for good stories instead of just kind of one-off little comedy bits. I feel like all the three of the... Or maybe there's more than 3 different plots going on, but all these different plots going on, most of them don't really lead anywhere other than just a kind of a punchline joke thing. And I feel like that was just a little bit of a letdown for me. I was hoping that they would have developed a bit more by the third season. But this does remind me of some of the stuff from that first one.
Were you with us when we did our last Voyager episode on this podcast?
Meld? No, I wasn't there for that one. But I did watch the episode.
I don't know if you've heard our discussion yet, but
Nope.
something that definitely came up during that episode, we all who are on the panel pretty much liked it to varying degrees and quite a lot, especially for a Voyager episode.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That being said, though, there was a line of conversation where the one thing that everyone didn't really care for, except for me, I was the exception, but the one thing that everyone else really didn't care for in that episode was the B plot.
Ah, yes.
Everyone thought the A plot was great and just screw the B plot and throw it, just jettison out in the escape pod, like completely unneeded. So all the other guys on the panel really disliked it. I thought it was fine. Like, to me, it was neither here nor there, but everyone else wanted to get rid of it. And I guess with that in mind, I think that's fairly common as well, generally in lower decks, because just like Carl always brings up how in TNG they had basically a formula for the episodes for pacing and commercial breaks. And Lower Decks has a version of the TNG formula. There's no question about it. And they do the same kind of thing as TNG, just on a shorter time scale, which is, there's always the A plot, and then there's the B, and sometimes there's a little small C. And a lot of times, even in good Lower Decks episodes, like Meld is for Voyager, there can be a significant A plot that is more meaningful or has something to say. But it'll still have a throwaway B plot. so yeah, that's definitely a common thing, I think, if you watch more episodes. But aside from that, just what you just said about how, the comedy doesn't really land and you would almost do without it. That is generally how I felt through most of season 1 when I first started watching this show as well. And I was trying to think what has changed. Like, have the jokes gotten more funny? This and that? Not necessarily. I think as I've spent more time with the show, over seasons 2 and 3, and now concluding with 4 and 5, I think what happened is, and I don't know because I'm just thinking of this in real time, I haven't put a lot of thought into this. I think what happened is I started to become more in touch with the primary protagonists in Lower Decks, the main 3, if you will. And, just like other Star Trek series, they have their highlight moments along the episodes and seasons, where they have little character arcs of their own. And so I guess becoming more in touch with those characters over the course of multiple episodes. And then, okay, it's a combination of that combined with, it reminds me of things I used to latch on to, like when I used to watch Seinfeld back in the day, or you could pick a lot of different sitcoms. Same thing happened like on Happy Days in the much older days of television, which is certain characters just have their shtick that they do. Like Fonzie would just be like the hey, and he like does like thumbs up, or Kramer just like barging in through the door unexpectedly. There's an element of that in watching all the Lower Decks episodes, where you just know Boimler's going to do something like this. I'm sorry, the main 4. I said 3 earlier. The main 4 is what I meant to say. I actually wanted to name the guy who has the augmentation.
Sam Rutherford. I wrote it down.
Yeah, Rutherford. Like, each of the main 4 has like a certain quirk, and it's just like going back to the same well. And I guess it's just like a Pavlovian response. But once I learned the character beats, like when they do the funny joke again, I mean that their character always does, it becomes like a welcome, familiarity.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I don't know if the jokes consistently get funnier, but because I have more attachment with them, I'm more happy to see like the recurring gags sometimes. But no, the plots do get a bit more interesting. There's definitely some nice moralistic things that pop up as you watch more of the series. And I guess something that also surprises me is it's not that they do member berries, because they do that a lot, obviously, but it's not just that.
Yeah.
It's as you get further in the show, like they start reaching deeper and deeper with their references, like to TNG and other things. And I guess there's some weird old fan joy I get when I recognize one of those really obscure ones, and I just can't believe they're doing that. Um, and so I guess that's another fun game to play when you start watching a lot of Lower Decks. So again, but the plots and ideas do get a bit more complex. It starts in the latter seasons. It starts reminding me more of Rick and Morty. I'm not saying it's Rick and Morty because, in terms of writing, because that wouldn't be a good thing either if it actually was. But I'm just saying how Rick and Morty, over the course of those seasons, how they kind of raised their bar of expectations of their writing abilities to a lesser degree, but similarly, I think that happens in Lower Decks as well.
Hmm. I will say when this series came out, I had a little bit of a bias towards it just because I feel like after I was done being a teenager, I left sitcoms behind and I left those kind of 25-minute long, just comedy TV shows in the dust completely. I never looked back or had much interest in going back. And so when this came out, I think it was like maybe 2021 or maybe 2020. I just felt like they had no direction for Star Trek. They didn't know what they were doing. They were just throwing things at the wall, hoping something would stick. And a lot of it felt desperate. And so when they pulled this out, I was kind of like, oh, here they go again, directionless, desperate. Now they're going to try to turn Star Trek into one of those kind of shows that I don't care about at all. But I was like, I always give these shows the first season, so I'll give it a shot. And like you mentioned, the characters, that's really what, by the time the season ended, even though I didn't really feel like any of the episodes super stood out, I didn't feel like the humor super worked. I did like those four cast of characters quite a bit, especially Tendi, the Orion character. Even though she's once again recycling the bits that I've seen her do previously, there's just something cute about her, something enjoyable.
Oh, 1,000,000%. And actually, I think there's something, I feel the same way about Rutherford as well.
Yep, I agree.
There's something cute and enjoyable about him. And I've become sort of like a fan of the voice actor who is also an actor in real life. I
Oh,
never knew who he was in real life until this series. And now, whenever I see his face pop up, he usually plays small roles in like independent movies, independent comedies, and other things, or bit roles on a series. Whenever I see his face pop up, or I recognize his voice because it's very unique, I always perk up, and it's all because of Lower Decks. And so he's, yeah, I've kind of become a fan of him outside of the show, um, more than I have with even Boimler. Oh my gosh, Boimler. Boimler.
boy, I can never say that name. I fuck it up every
I
time.
never thought about saying it. See, that's the thing. I've enjoyed this show since it came out, but it's not like the previous Star Trek series where I would normally have conversation with friends. Oh, Kirk this, data this, Worf this. Like I've not actually audibly said their names out loud, like speaking to friends, until kind of this moment right now. So I guess that's why the words feel funny on the tongue, even though I've heard them a million times in the show.
Oh wow, I just looked up that guy you're talking about, Eugene Cordero, and I realized that he was on the one sitcom that I have watched in all this time. My partner kind of forced it on me to watch it, The Good Place.
Yeah.
I was kind of like, oh, I don't care about sitcoms. I don't want to watch this. But admittedly, that program I did end up enjoying that whole thing. I thought that they kept the plot quite interesting and the gags were funny enough. It was just another show with charming characters, just in kind of funny situations.
Okay. If we're talking about sitcoms for a second, it's funny because I've attempted to start watching The Good Place 3 times before, and I never got past episode 2 until recently, like literally within this last month. I think I'm
Oh,
on episode 6 now. So this is the farthest I've ever gotten. But I have more to say about The Good Place, but I'm not. All I will say is about sitcoms in general. Um, when you said you kind of left them, when you got past a certain age, I didn't
yeah.
leave sitcoms per se at a certain age, but sitcoms left me, that's for sure. Because even in my older years, for a time, there was around when some could argue Sex and the City, the series on HBO, but that's sort of
Mm.
like, I don't know, that's through a paywall. Or in the old days, that's through a paywall. So I don't know if I count it. But um, around the time Arrested Development came out,
Mm.
that was like signaling the beginning of a new era of sitcoms, of basically switching to single cam, production wise. And Arrested Development was doing all these ideas that were new, but they didn't really latch on in the mainstream way. But people in the
Mm.
know noticed. I mean, fans and people in the industry noticed what Arrested Development did differently, and then it really got broken open. Um, this new slash high concept sitcom form with the American Office, and then it was just off to the races. And it was sort of like a revitalization of the American sitcom until, of course, it became overbloated and ate itself. But so there was a time when Arrested Development was brilliant. Obviously, The Office
Yeah.
brilliant. To a lesser extent, Parks and Rec. Like the first 3 years of Modern Family, I thought, oh my god, I can't believe it. Someone has resurrected like the family dynamic for a sitcom, traditional family, quote unquote, traditional quote unquote. Um, and yeah, but then it was a slow fade, and then there's little sitcoms I found that were interesting, on Netflix and other things, Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt. But yeah,
Oh yeah, forgot about
it's
that show.
it's difficult now though, because every once in a while I'll check in on like the offerings that are on. If you want to feel really terrible, like yeah, watch any of the sitcoms that are that go straight to network or straight to cable, like not to streaming.
Oh no.
It's rough. It's rough because they're still trying to supposedly play to the lowest common denominator, and that's not the way
Oh wow.
in these days of television. But what are we talking about? Star Trek, everybody. And of course, the big deal with this episode is that we go to DS9. Well, first tell me this. Did this feel like, oh, it's just a member berry situation? Like, they're going to a well of something, that's obviously legacy?
Well, yeah, that's where my questions come to you because it seemed like all these characters had previously interacted with Quark, with Kira. Had they been to DS9 previously or just met those characters previously?
Neither.
Oh, oh, that's odd then.
And this is why I posed the question also, if this felt like just like a nostalgia grab to you, because at least in my recollection, because it's been a long time since I saw season 3, in my recollection, they really didn't start going to the legacy well very much until really season 3. And this was the first big time, you know what I mean,
Hmm.
when they started getting into more mainline characters of the past. So this was new. Now they'll do more later, but this was like relatively new. That being said, at least in my recollection, that's part of why I was so excited when this particular episode first came out, because I thought, oh, here we go. Now we're going to do it. Now, now we're going to get into this kind of stuff. And in a weird way, I was thinking about it now because it kind of reminds me of how I felt when, uh, what is the episode called? Is it Trial and Tribulations?
Yep, that's it.
That's kind of how, except it was on a it was on a much more massive scale. But that's how I felt when that episode was brand new and when they teased it. And next week on DS9, I had that same feeling, except it was exponentially greater at that time.
Oh, that makes it slightly more disappointing then, because I mean, we got a lot of fun stuff with Quark and his bar. I thought a lot of that stuff was the more memorable stuff. But Kira really got the short end of the stick then in that case, because her gag with that, I'm assuming he's the security officer. I don't remember his name. That guy never stood out to me.
Yeah, he's a security / ops, like whatever Worf's job is on Enterprise.
Yeah, their one note gag that they have her doing the whole episode. That was one of the least standout elements of it. So that's kind of disappointing for her first episode on this show. And maybe only. I don't know if she comes back.
I honestly can't remember that if she comes back. But I learned from Wikipedia that this was the very first time any characters from DS9 or actors had ever revisited their roles since 99.
Oh, wow. Huh.
Like in canon form, like, on screen or audio, whatever you want to say. And they did have they had the actual actor and actress for Quark and Kira, which Kira, I could tell it was Kira. I mean, the real voice, just a little bit older.
Yeah.
But I thought Quark was a sound-alike initially. Didn't sound like the real Armin Shimmerman at all to me at first, but it was him.
Yeah, he does sound like he's playing it a little bit different, but still enjoyable. It was nice to be able to be like, hey, that is them. And I just enjoyed seeing the ship. I think overall this show looks really quality for what it is. I'm sure it doesn't have a huge budget, but they make it work pretty well.
Wait, which are you talking about in particular with visuals?
Just like the overall show. Like I just seeing DS9, them walking around the sets.
Oh, okay.
I was like, hey, I'm liking this. It feels good enough. I'm pleased with it.
Yeah, in a weird way, I see a parallel to the Clone Wars series, which I haven't even mentioned because on Novice Elitis recently, me and Isaac have had a few ancillary conversations about Clone Wars, and I haven't even brought it up during those conversations yet. But I'll bring it up now in regards to Lower Decks. Is something I think I noticed, but I'll have to rewatch the whole series to confirm. While the character models and the primary, let's call them sets that they, often inhabit on the Cerritos, while they remain basically consistent throughout the series, I do believe that backgrounds and like what would have been matte painting landscapes if this was live action, and especially 3D models of the starships and other vehicles, I think those improve. Those and the backdrops, I think those improve over the course of the series. And you just kind of don't notice it because you're more focused on the characters themselves. And the same thing happens to an even more extreme extent. Of course, it's over a longer course of time with Clone Wars. Yes, the character models do improve over the years, but the other stuff in the background gets dramatically better over time.
Yeah, and I couldn't tell if this was better than that first season in terms of the look, but it definitely stood out. I did enjoy that first scene when they're circling around DS9 and they brought back the theme. I was like, hey, this is good. I didn't care for the joke necessarily, though, the interrupting. Did you like that? You're laughing, so I assume you do.
Well, they didn't have to do it a second time,
Yeah.
but the first time definitely hit for me. But the funny thing about this gag and other gags that are like this, they get a little bit meta within the show.
Yeah.
As is reiterated time and time again from the creators and whoever's in charge of lore for Star Trek at Paramount or Bad Robot or whatever, they constantly reiterate that Lower Decks is canon in the Star Trek universe and the Prime universe, whatever that is.
Oh boy.
And so if I always think about that in the back of my mind, that this is canon, like these are the real adventures of these characters on this vessel called the Cerritos, then it makes moments like that pretty kooky. Pretty kooky when they make those meta jokes and references. So that's bizarre to me to think that this is all canon. All these events really happen in the same universe as the televised series from before. So I don't know.
Well, I just choose to put it in the same category as New Doctor Who. They can call it canon. It's secondary canon in my mind. That doesn't make it lesser. It just is clearly not the same thing to everybody who's not the people producing it. But I am curious. When does this show take place? Is this before Picard? Is this?
It's definitely before Picard. Season 1 of Lower Decks, episode 1, I believe that takes place approximately 1 year after the Star Trek Nemesis movie.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
So there you go. I don't know how. Presumably, the entire series could be possibly 5 years in Star Trek time, maybe 4 or 5 years.
It's so weird how the new Star Trek shows you need like a map to see where they all take place. It is unusual that they keep doing this.
Well, Star Wars is exactly the same, and
Yeah.
to an extent, the MCU is as well with their movies and series definitely not always being chronological as compared to release date. Definitely not.
And the Alien franchise is like that now. Yeah, prequels have really taken over a lot of big franchises.
Well, the thing is, yes, prequels. It's funny because Star Wars is almost kind of responsible for all of this.
Yeah.
Across because it started with prequels. Now, obviously, the Star Wars prequels weren't the first prequels, but it's at least in my mind as a Gen Xer, the Star Wars prequels are definitely what put that term prequel in the zeitgeist.
Yeah.
So there was that, but also not only that, but when Filoni started making the Clone Wars animated series, they, as far as I can tell, brought into existence the term midquel. And the idea of a midquel, which you could say like the Solo movie is. Now it kind of starts like even that term, as far as I can tell, with Clone Wars series. But then as they continue to make more Clone Wars and then make other animated Star Wars things after that, they take the concept of midquel to other levels because they start making midquels within like quadriquels and semi-quadriquels or quarterquels. Like Filoni is just like slicing the onion again and again and making more fractional quells. It's pretty nuts. Yeah, quells within quells.
Oh, yeah, it's all kooky. And sometimes you got to wonder what's the value of it. But
well, it's basically what Big Finish has been doing for Doctor Who. It's just no one knows what Big Finish is outside of Doctor Who fans. But it's the same concept.
Yeah, and to be fair, I guess if you're a fan of expanded novels, they've been doing this for who knows how long. that's been going on.
Yeah, true. Very true. Very true. Very true. But in this case, in Star Wars' case, it's canon, though, quote unquote.
Yeah, it's all quote unquote. Yeah. But I guess one of the things I did want to mention, because since it's the first time this is being covered on this podcast, yeah, what do you think about the opening theme for this TV show and that whole sequence that they do? Do you like the choices?
Do I like the choices, you said?
Yeah, yeah, some of the choices they make with it.
So the music is fine for me because, and which is a little strange because I am very much not a fan of the Voyager opening. Yeah, that's probably my least favorite of all the Star Trek openings. I don't even want to start bringing disco into the conversation because that complicates things. I mean, even if I'm only talking about the opening, that just complicates things. So, considering I don't care for the Voyager opening, I think it's weird that I don't mind this one. And so there's two parts. There's the actual theme, and then there's the visual gags, I guess.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe because it is most like the Voyager opening, except they turn it a little bit on its head. Maybe inversely, that's why I like it. Because maybe subconsciously I feel like they're goofing off Voyager. And because I don't like the Voyager opening, maybe that's why I'm okay with this one.
That's fair. Yeah, I was curious because I actually do really like the music, and I think overall it's a really lovely, just visually speaking, piece of animation. I just wish the gags weren't there. There's only one gag that I don't mind, that creature on the back of the nacelle. I like that, but otherwise it's...
Spoilers for season 6, and maybe they do it in season 5, I don't remember. But I noticed, because of certain situations that were happening on screen at the time, because I forget who the composer is for this series, but if it's one single person or what. But certainly in season 6, because it makes sense with what's happening on screen, they start dipping into Horner sound-alike Star Wars music.
Oh.
And in my humble opinion, they do it really well because they don't exactly duplicate the Horner stuff, but it's definitely sound alike. And they don't do it for like an entire episode. It's for certain things. And I think it works. And not only that, if we're talking about Star Trek music, everyone knows, yeah, and it's definitely true in the motion pictures. Yes, Jerry Goldsmith was hands down the best for Star Trek in particular. There's no question about it. When it comes to all the motion pictures, whether they're TNG or original cast, I I find it difficult to listen to the non Jerry Goldsmith soundtracks unless it's Horner, but that's a subcategory. I can't listen to the other ones. But the reason I brought the Horner thing was because most of the Star Trek music for other series, like especially newer stuff, they're usually somewhere in the TNG realm of music, somewhere on that spectrum, which is fine. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I think they should, in a more like not a comedic series, but in some type of standard Star Trek something else, I think it's worthy to look back at some of the Horner stuff and not completely duplicate it, but just evoke some of that sound, because when they did it in Lower Decks, which as far as I know, it's the first time it's been done in Star Trek, I just thought it really, really worked well. And so much of obviously Wrath of Khan, and I think it's part of the reason why I don't hate Search for Spock nearly as much as other Star Trek fans seem to hate it, because that score, like
it's a good one.
It works so well, and it's so tied into the particular significant scenes in those two movies that it just wouldn't be the same. It could still be a good movie, like if Jerry Goldsmith did it, but it would just be different.
Yeah, I was trying to picture it with like the score from that fourth movie. Yeah, oof. Yeah, it'd be so much worse. Not that that's a bad score for the fourth movie necessarily, but yeah, that's an odd thought.
I really don't like the score for 4 and
Uh,
Generations.
yeah. I mean, it's okay, but
I only give 6 a pass because it's an awesome movie, but it's also a weird one.
no, that's certainly true. That movie has a lot of weirdness. It's still a good movie, but there's a lot of weird little bits in it.
And then what's funny about the Goldsmith themes, the only one that's a little bit strange out of the ones that he penned was Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy.
Oh, I didn't know he penned that.
Final Frontier. Final Frontier. It's good, but it sounds too much like Goldsmith's like Kuroko phase, if you know what I mean. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh, it's been too long since I've gone back to that movie.
Okay. Well, do you know what the Kuroko phase is in general?
I know the studio. I don't remember his work in those movies. So I don't know which ones he did.
Well, see, he very much did Total Recall, Rambo movies.
Oh, that was him? Huh.
Oh yes, oh yes. Once you know, you can't unknow. So he very much did like Rambo and Total Recall, and because they liked his score for First Blood so much, because that was sort of like the first Kuroko movie, he is the one who scored the little sting for the Kuroko logo that plays on all the Kuroko films.
Oh, wow. Don't think I knew that either. Huh.
So Jerry Goldsmith composed that. So that's why I always associate him with that whole darn company. And so if you know the scores for especially First Blood and Total Recall, Final Frontier sounds too Kuroko. And because
Uh,
Kuroko was known for making like these hard, gritty action sci-fi movies of the '80s, Final Frontier is like fits in line. Like it feels like
the Prison
Star
Planet.
Trek Final Frontier, produced by Kuroko. Like that.
There you go. I can see it on that little. Yeah.
That's pretty much what that movie is. But aside from that outlier, Final Frontier, what's funny to me is that I almost think the Jerry Goldsmith scores improve as you get further in the TNG. Like the there's a there's an inverse relationship between the Goldsmith scores getting better and the quality of the films going down at the same time. That's my theory.
Snap. Um, but one of the things I wanted to mention too with this opening is, I forget how pretty the ship is. This, how do you say it in the Cerrito? I forget.
Cerritos.
Cerritos.
Yeah, it rhymes with Doritos.
I love all the colors on it. I appreciate them kind of going out there. I just wish that the nacelles weren't quite as long as they are. I think that's kind of, it looks kind of weird, but I do appreciate all the glorious shots we get for it in that opening.
If we're going to talk about the ship for a second, I was never, this is a minor thing, but I never signed off on the kooky deflector dish on the Enterprise D, which is a continued motif on this one. So there's that, but that's a minor quibble. For me, the one thing that looks really odd is the length of the pylons that connect the nacelles. To me, they're too long, or they're also too vertical. Like they need to be swept out more at an angle as you look at it from the front. Um, so that's my major issue with the ship
Fair
design
point.
is the length of the pylons. But also something odd I noticed, and I don't know if this is the first on-screen canon Star Trek ship to do this or not, but it's the first one that I ever noticed do this. And I had mentioned it sometime, I think on RBG, but I don't know if it was on or off air. A couple years ago, I said, "What in the world? Like, why is the Cerritos the only starship vessel that I'm aware of where the name is printed on the primary hull on the back half?"
Oh,
It's the first ship I
oh.
ever noticed do that, but I have seen it since in newer Paramount Trek. So they've done it a couple other
Hmm.
times with other ships. I I want someone to explain that to me. Like no, I mean like the designer had something in mind. I don't know what it is, but I'm sure they would have an answer if you were to ask them, like conceptually, why they decided to do that. And I don't know, but I want to know, like, what is that all about? Because that's curious.
Yeah, and just out of my own curious element, do they keep this same opening animation throughout, or do they change it up as it goes forward, or is it basically the same?
What it is right now in this episode, season 3, episode 6, I'm pretty sure it's exactly the same through the end. But I don't know if that was the exact same one like in season 1.
Hmm.
I'd actually have to go back and check because I don't know if they did like Rick and Morty, where over, well, they certainly don't do it as much if they even do it at all. But Rick and Morty, they kind of modify it over time, over seasons. Like they keep elements but switch out others. At least
Sure.
of right now, I'm not aware of them doing that on Lower Decks, but I can't say that for sure though.
Too bad. I just wish those gags weren't there because I really like that opening, but I just don't like it falling back and then they hit something and I don't know. It takes away.
I like the gags. I don't need the slug hacks like hitching a ride, but for some reason I like the gag with the Borg, with
It's not bad.
the wolf whatever like battle that's going on. Was it Wolf 359? Whatever. That one, that's a good gag.
Yeah, it's not too bad. Um, what else? Because yeah, I feel like I didn't have too much to say or prepare.
What'd you think about the storyline with Mariner?
Um, it felt weird in the context of Star Trek. All those girls having their little salon party. It's hard to imagine some crew members just doing that in their off time. It just doesn't. They seem too much like college students or something. They don't necessarily.
Well, that's the thing. And well, hold on. That's the thing though about Lower Decks as compared to other Star Trek series. We've never really spent time with the quote unquote lower decks. I mean, yes, there's been little bits and pieces and side characters in other Star Trek series, but to full time focus. And the closest thing that I saw that reminded me of this prior to Lower Decks was in Star Trek 6 when they're searching for the boots and we see the bunks, um, where presumably the ensigns or I forget what they're called in Star Trek, but I think they call them petty officers or something who are not officers. We like never. Chief O'Brien is like the only one we ever really meet in Star Trek, and but in Star Trek 6 we get a glimpse into like what their crew quarters look like, and I think that's kind of the only time we see until Lower Decks. And
Mm,
so presumably, if that exists on a starship, and it should exist, uh, presumably it would be like this. It's just we've never spent time. We've spent time with individual characters who fit this like demographic description, but not a whole bunch of them congregating together. And presumably, like the cadets in Wrath of Khan, presumably when they're on their own time, off duty,
yeah.
this is how they would be, or some version of this. Not
Well,
literally.
yeah. Maybe not quite this. This is.
Yeah, it's Lower Decks, but still different from what we've ever seen with any other Trek cruise.
Yeah, and again, that's just part of the premise for the show. That I just those kind of comedic sequences. That was the stuff that I just didn't particularly enjoy during that first season or in this particular episode. It was much more the Quark plot and the Tendi. Is that her name? Oh, now I'm getting a bit drunk. I can't remember what the names are, but but her plot and her whole Orion thing with that guy.
Tendi.
That stuff I enjoyed more.
Yeah, and see, and I think that's due to experiencing this as a standalone episode.
Sure, could be. Yeah.
Because I was also having this thought rewatching this episode today. that the way they go with the B plots and the C plots, and or just let's say the arc plots, like season arc plots, because that's definitely a thing, very much post season one and Lower Decks. It's one thing I think that this show shares with Strange New Worlds, because you know how Strange New Worlds is, like how they deal with season arcs, and how you have obviously the episode of the week, the issue of the week, but then you have like what's going on with Chapel and Spock and this and that, or what's going on with Uhura and her career advancement or choices. You know how they insert bits and pieces throughout a season of Strange New Worlds? Lower Decks follows the same formula. And I know some people really don't care for that. I know some people on this podcast and not on this podcast feel that way about Strange New Worlds. So I guess that depends, eye of the beholder. But for me personally, I think that silly subplot with Mariner is much better appreciated when you watch it as part of the arc of the season, because the primary four definitely progress as characters over the course of the entire show. Each has their individual plot, and you get a big chunk of what Tendi's arc is very much revealed in this episode in particular, but only to be explored much more in later episodes. But all the primary four have their own arcs, and even the senior officers, to an extent, all have an arc as well throughout the show. It's just obviously we check in with them a lot less.
Yeah, and I will say the first laugh, and probably some of the very few that I did get in this, not to again knock it, I just didn't find it particularly funny, but it was kind of an enjoyable level of humor. It wasn't off-putting. But the first one that did get me was that the other Orion guy, when he's like, "Oh, we get some pretty shady people in here, like our kind of people, right?" And he's like nudging her, and just
Yes.
it just the way it was delivered, and I'm fine with just watching her be uncomfortable this whole episode with this guy bringing that up.
What's funny about that aspect of that character in particular in this episode, the other Orion, is that, and I think this might be another reason why I like Lower Decks, not just for Star Trek, but even compared to other modern series, animated or otherwise. But, they're really satirizing, casual racism, if you will, stereotyping and whatnot. And even though it's pretty basic in this episode, it still feels like something to me that has been absent in American television in general for, I don't know, approximately 10 years now. Like, and even in a satirical way, making jokes like this. Now, I haven't watched all American television in the last 10 years, so maybe someone out there knows examples of shows that I'd never seen. I grant you that. But I've watched many shows that, have gone mainstream popular, and it's rare that you get such racial jokes right out there. And I get it. They did the satire allegory thing in TOS all the time, but also that was also another era when you could blatantly satirize. I don't know how you're supposed to say that word. Satirize?
Yeah, satirize.
I don't know how. I mean, yeah, of course they did that in the 60s, whether you're watching a Western or Star Trek. Yeah, they wore it on their sleeve when they made these nods to prejudice, right? But they don't do it like that, at least in the last 10 years in modern television. Like, be so blunt about it. And I just miss the ease of it. And maybe it's because it's an animated show, they can get away with more in that regard. But yeah, it feels comforting in a like an old school kind of way. I don't know if comforting is the right word, but I'm just glad that it's okay. I don't know. Does it sound like I'm making a big deal out of a little thing?
No, it's a nice little detail in the episode that is overall very silly, and just to have some little bit of, some substance in there, that always helps a little bit and makes it feel more Star Trek. So that's nice to see. And like I said, it was one of the few parts of the episode that had some actual laughs for me. So that also helps.
I was surprised that Boimler was actually winning at. Oh my god, what's the name of the game?
Oh, I can't remember. Damn.
Dabo. Is it Dabo?
Yeah, that's it.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, because she's a Dabo girl.
Yeah, that's exactly where I went.
So I was surprised Boimler was actually winning because I told you they just have their character traits that they repeat all the time. I just assumed he was going to lose all his money and just keep losing and losing and losing. But that's not the case. So that was a surprise. And it's sometimes hilarious in other episodes how Boimler just somehow does the wrong thing. Like he always has the worst instincts.
Yeah, I kept expecting, like, okay, what's the punchline going to be? Because, yeah, we all know Boimler, he's the fuck up. Yeah, well, how is he going to screw up this situation? And so when they did get to the end joke, I was like, okay, I guess I can kind of get that. That's not too bad.
But I don't. Do you even care about seeing that particular alien species again from DS9? The race of aliens returning from the Gamma Quadrant.
Oh yes, the what's it again?
Karema.
Yeah, them. Yeah, it took me a minute. I was kind of like, okay, what these kind of look familiar. Who are these guys? And was when Quark was talking about them, I was kind of like, I feel like I have a vague memory of them. And eventually it clicked in. I was like, oh, okay, I remember those guys now. But yes, maybe maybe it was just distracting for me trying to remember who they are. But I guess it's nice that they brought that back.
I visually remember seeing them on DS9, and I remember they had something to do with the Dominion,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't tell you from memory much else about them. Like in my head, I thought they were servants or something, like a servant class for the Dominion. And even now, I don't know if that's true or not. That's just my vague memory.
Yeah, my vague memory, I feel like they were like not quite a neutral party, but they were kind of like, okay, maybe we'll work with you guys. And the Federation was thinking maybe they can get in with them. And then maybe it turned out they weren't neutral, but it's, yeah, very foggy memories for me too.
I have to say, looking at an image of what they look like in live action, absolutely, completely absurd.
Oh, I have a vague memory, but let me see here.
But
Oh,
they were Karemma.
yeah. Oh, they do look stupid.
They remind me of how I hate the look of the. Oh my gosh, what are they called in Voyager seasons 1, 2, 3?
I can't think of who you're talking about.
People call them like the trailer trash version of Klingons.
Oh, yes. What are they
Are
called?
they Kazon?
I think that's it. Yeah. It's getting late for me. My brain's starting to shut down.
Those ridiculous Voyager aliens. I always detested the look of their makeup, and
Yeah.
their garb is not much to talk about either. But these Karema seem more objectionable to me. I mean, the style of their prosthetic and what screws up, I think, both the Kazon, the Karema, and other Star Trek species in the 90s is okay, they have this outlandish appearance. Okay, we get it. But what makes this live action version so much worse and other aliens and Star is how even though the aliens can look alien-y in their face, they always have the human hair attached to the weird alien face. And the human hair, no matter what the shape of their cranium is, it always has to look like human hair from the 1980s or 1990s on Earth. Why? Why? When everything else is so alien about them, what they have to ground them in human-looking hairstyles of a bygone era. That's just, ugh, it's really horrid to look at this chroma creature thing.
It does look pretty embarrassing. I forgot they looked that bad.
Um, because like this character, this chroma I'm looking at on screen, on my screen, it's like, okay, fine, it's an alien race, but for some reason they're visiting. It's like they have 18th century hairstyle. They're aliens visiting the 18th century, except they're dyeing their hair black instead of keeping it white, and that just makes no sense to me. Um, this is almost, never mind. I'm not even going to bring up my Lord of the Rings comparison because it's too late for that.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to think if there's any more little dangling threads I wanted to make sure to get in.
It's a decent episode. It also makes you wish you could meet other characters from DS9, but I also can't even remember in the lore or canon what necessarily happens to all the different characters, post DS9.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't even know who's supposed to be where.
Oh, sorry. I remembered one more thing I wanted to ask you. There's a point in this episode when they start doing a little bit more higher level swearing, and they were censoring it out. And I was like,
yes.
is this common for this show, or is this done for comedic effect? Because I know for Picard and Discovery, they were definitely throwing around some F-bombs here or there, or so I was just like, oh, is this, I don't know why they're doing this.
Makes me wonder. I don't know what Picard is rated for television. I see that Lower Decks is rated TV 14, so that could be part of the reason. But are you familiar with the Doctor character on Lower Decks?
I can't remember them. No, if I ever saw them.
I don't even know if they appear in this episode, and if they did, it was really quick. But they may not appear at all in this episode. So the Doctor is this cat species. I don't know if it's the same as the cat species that existed in animated Trek before or not. Probably, but it looks different. Anyway, it's a cat humanoid species, and she's the Doctor, and she's a completely irascible personality. And she's extremely disgruntled. And one could say, oh, she's just like, a more intense version of Bones. No, I don't think that's what it is. And this idea came to me recently when I was binging Lower Decks. I think she might be a little, I don't know if this is the right adjective, but I'm all out of adjectives. I don't know if she's a little bit of an ironic, comic foil of Pulaski. Because I think what the cat doctor might be personality-wise is, oh, if you thought Pulaski was grating and difficult to get along with as a character, like if you were on the actual Enterprise, I think the cat character takes it to a whole new level. And I think that's what part of the comedy is. And that particular character, who features a lot in later episodes, gets agitated easily, and their shtick becomes completely cussing like a sailor in moments of rage and frustration. And for me, binging the show, it is a welcome comedic callback every time she loses her shit, so to speak. And yes, they do the intentional bleeping, and it gets out of control, but I think it's funny. But that's the cat doctor. Yeah, she's kind of like Pulaski mixed with
Tig Notaro.
Yeah, I was doing it pig Latin in my head. She's kind of a combination of those two characters, but then taken to the extreme. And yeah, she's pretty funny. Yeah, I mean, we're kind of closing out. I know we've just kind of been talking about other Trek, but I'm sure if you listen to this podcast, you're mostly fine with that, with us not necessarily talking about the episode at hand. And if you've seen the episode, then, I mean, I think you get it too, why we're not necessarily breaking down this one episode. And and so before I kind of give some of my final thoughts, what unit of measure would you like to go with?
Well, I guess we do see them pushing around some big containers of Romulan ale, so could do that.
All right. All right. That gag never gets old. I mean, whenever Romulan ale is referenced, not only in Lower Decks, but in everything.
Yeah, I didn't mind that.
So, this episode, I guess because there have been other Lower Decks episodes that I've seen that I definitely like a lot more, I'm just going to come out with just a nice calm 3 out of 5 bottles of Romulan ale. And yeah, I like this episode. It's fine, but it's definitely not as good as other episodes. But again, it gets complicated because even though you can watch any episode of Lower Decks out of sequence, overall they're more powerful when you watch them for the most part in order. I mean, that's kind of like how the DS9 series is post season 3. except because they have such a much higher episode count in DS9. I mean, episode count. Because of that, they can have more true standalones, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But with certain good episodes of DS9, it's kind of hard to watch some of them out of context. And that's a little bit true, or to different degrees, with episodes of Lower Decks. And then the other, I guess, final thought I forgot to mention is that because I was thinking with Tendi, like I said, this episode definitely plays into her arc, and and at this point in this show, we're starting to definitely learn more about her backstory and why her personality is the way it is. But that being said, I realize, especially in new Trek, meaning stuff since they went into streaming, they have really expanded on Orion lore in terms of like on screen. I know there's been books and things, but for on screen canon, they have really got, not just in Lower Decks, but like in Discovery as well. I don't know if this is a good or bad thing. I don't even know what fans think about that. But yeah, they've definitely pushed hard with the Orions in general since we got into the streaming era.
Yeah, and I'll echo what you said. I think this one's definitely a 3. This is perfectly enjoyable little piece of Lower Decks. I would like to explore it more and see some of the really standout ones, because overall, I feel like just about everything I've seen is about a 3 or lower. But I feel like the show has potential to be a lot stronger. So I'm curious to see some of those good ones. And yeah, still just enjoy this cast of characters, and I'd be happy to see them plopped into just a random adventure every now and again. I think that's fun.
They're really great, and as much as I like Lower Decks a lot, I almost really wish it was a full-on live-action series, the way we saw them in that episode of Strange New Worlds.
That was great. Yeah.
But just keep it like all Lower Decks universe live action. Obviously, you couldn't do the same level of humor, etc., or it'd start getting weird and meta and spoofy. But have these characters, especially the primary 4, play themselves. Wow, that would be really cool. Because yeah, I have to see. This has been another criticism that many of us have had for much of the new streaming Trek era, which is it's been difficult to fall in love with new characters they've introduced into Trekdom.
Mm.
But, of the brand new characters, because even in Strange New Worlds, most of them are reoccurring legacy characters. But for new characters who didn't exist prior to the streaming era, yeah, these are probably my favorite 4. Well, to be fair, I really like Rutherford and Boimler, and then Tendi had to grow on me, and I don't dislike her, but Mariner is not my favorite of of the quad. And spoiler, the number 4 maybe changes by the end of the series. So I can say no more about that. But yeah, I really, really like these characters now that I've seen their story. And for those of you who have finished Lower Decks, because the series has ended officially, I really, really hope we get to see the continual growth of these 4 or another numeral of characters going forward. Because let's say they don't ever continue this show in some form, it is such a perfect thing. Like, this is such a perfect sandbox of characters to extend in novels or comic book form. Like, they are perfect for that. And even if they went comic book form, I wouldn't want them to do it in the same tone of this show. I would rather them adapt it like graphic novel, meaning more serious, more grounded in realism, like the way their appearance is on Strange New Worlds. I think that would be absolutely incredible in illustrated form like that. Especially if know, you know, how much has been put into all 4 characters separately. Um, yeah, they're wow. You know, because what they accomplish with these 5 seasons, with these shorter length episodes and shorter length seasons compared to 90s Trek, what they have done with these characters, it took them years and, you know, dozens and dozens of episodes to accomplish this type of character growth with the casts of TNG, DS9, Voyager, Enterprise. Like, these characters are much better developed in these 5 seasons. The 4, the main 4, or other number. Really well done.
Yeah, and I was gonna say, kind of stupidly, I feel like in comic books, the way that they've taken the Power Rangers license and really, taken some pretty absurd or more comedically toned things and brought a serious element to them. They've done so much fantastic stuff with that series. I'd love to see some darker Lower Deck stories as well, but I don't know again what's in the series. They may have some cool stuff to come. So
What's the is the new Ultraman live action? Is that Japanese or American?
oh,
Or do you know?
there's been so many of them lately. Do you mean the Shin Ultraman?
Okay, let's just say whether it's animated or not, anything in recent Ultraman, do any or all or some have like a more grounded, serious tone?
I feel like there's been so many that I haven't seen. I can't say for sure. Most of the stuff I've seen has been a bit more silly. So
I think that genre of what is that called? The genre of Power Rangers or Ultraman.
I don't know. With Godzilla and stuff like that, we always just say tokusatsu, but I don't know if it's different with the with those types of TV shows with the mechs and yeah, I don't know.
Because I want to say mecha, but every time I say mecha, I think of more things like Gundam and Evangelion. Like, I don't think of the Megazords or like the
Yeah,
Voltrons of the world. Whatever that genre is called, um, I would like to see, yeah, like a live action or animated one that was just grounded a little bit more. But I don't know. It's hard to say because then there's things like Macross and Gundam that are adjacent, and we already have that. But I don't know
that's
how to
fair.
explain it.
Yeah.
But for Power Rangers, that'd be cool.
Yeah, and they might be doing that with the new Netflix series that they're planning to put together. They're doing a big reboot. So
Definitely a risk because, man, after I haven't seen the Airbender live action, but the way it was received and the way Halo was received, and the Cowboy Bebop, it's so hard to screw that up. I have seen Cowboy Bebop and I have seen Halo live action, and for me, they weren't that bad, but
yeah,
apparently they just rub people the wrong way.
Avatar wasn't that bad either.
So, if they're doing that with Power Rangers, that's risky. Very risky. And I do want to check that one out. I just wanted to get a little more animated under my
That's
belt
fair.
first.
Yeah, I feel like people watched like the first 2 episodes of that Avatar series and just spent the next 8 weeks just lambasting it based on those two. And I don't even know if they watched the rest of it because it definitely improved as it went along. But what can you do? There's such a hate culture on, especially with criticism, that I feel like so many things, like they wouldn't even get as many views if they were loving it. They thrive on that hate. So
Okay, this is a separate conversation, but I have to comment on it
sure.
since you brought it up. And I think there's two different things going on with this subject as it pertains to media at large or fan media at large right now. On the one side, the hate culture, especially what's driven by YouTube and social media, when we're just talking about that part of the equation, I think the hate culture is much more amplified than what it actually is percentage wise of fans of whatever thing we're talking about right now. So that's one element of that. But on the other side, even though that element, that the hate culture stands out so much more on X and Facebook and YouTube when they're criticizing Star Trek, Doctor Who, etc., even though they're far more represented on social media, I still think, though, if the thing is good or considered good by the right number of eyeballs, regardless of if they're like high concept critics or just casual viewers, I still think the good things will hang around a bit longer and the bad things will just slough off as they do, despite the very vocal hate culture out there. I don't know. This is just a theory. I don't have statistics or evidence to back it up. But because I know there's it'll be, I think Prophecy has gotten good numbers for HBO. I'm not sure. But, regardless of what people say about disliking them, like Rings of Power will fail no matter what anybody says because it's just terrible. And Prophecy is not terrible. How good is it? I'm not sure, but it's not terrible. And no amount of YouTube videos is going to change that with those two shows.
Yeah, that's fair. Well, yeah, maybe not so relevant to this episode or Lower Decks, because I think this has mostly been well received. And for, my return after so many years, I think it's been 4 years since my last episode, a solid return. So cheers for this pick, Eric. I definitely enjoyed comeback.
Thanks. Honestly, of the new Star Trek shows, when people have actually watched them, like not just 3 episodes, but watched more, like at least entire seasons or more of any of the new Trek shows, the ones that I think that are most universally liked for those who have seen a good chunk of them, I honestly think it's Lower Decks and Prodigy. More so than Strange New Worlds, and let's not even talk about anything else. Honestly, I think if you've actually watched them, they're quite well received. But the problem is, especially with Prodigy, not that many people have actually watched it or given it a chance, so they have no idea. Or they only watched the first 3 episode arc, which is a turnoff. Which is like the Clone Wars movie for the 3D animated series. That's a horrible place to start.
Yeah.
Horrible. And that's kind of how Prodigy is. So if you can get past that, Prodigy gets really good.
It's sad. I was trying to watch that a few weeks ago. I think I can't remember what made it pop into my head, but I was like, I kind of want to pick up where I left off and go back to that show, give it a second shot. And I couldn't find it anywhere. I don't know where it is. Is it not streaming or?
Oh, it's on Netflix now. It's on Netflix.
Oh.
So a few months after they had aired all the episodes of season 1, or I don't know if it was a few months, but maybe 6 months after they aired all the episodes, because they released it in 2 10-episode chunks, the season 1 of Prodigy. Once they released the second 10-episode chunk, they within months they took it off completely from Paramount Plus, and people were like, "What the heck?" And they had announced it was basically going to be canceled,
Oh
and
man.
people were like, "Okay, well, why do you have to like completely remove it?" And that's because they were shopping around the rights to pick up and continue the show, airing the show, because they canceled it just as they were finishing animating season 2. And so Netflix picked it up and you can watch it on Netflix. And yeah, season 2's been out for some months now. I've only seen the first 2 or 3 episodes, but it definitely seems to be a continuation of the goodness that was set up in season 1. And even though season 1 is 2 sets of 10 episodes, it also feels like the first 10 episodes are like act 1, and the next 10 episodes, like they could have made it season 1 and just gone with 10 episode seasons is what I'm saying. Because the first half and the latter half of season 1 definitely feel like you're on 2 different arcs.
By the way, it's not available in Canada on Netflix.
So it must be somewhere though.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out where it is. It looks like it might be on Apple TV. I have to check that later.
But yeah, it's really good. And if we weren't going to do Lower Decks this evening, there was a particular episode from season 1 I was going to jump into, a Prodigy. But again, I don't know if it works outside the context. And it's a standalone episode. The problem is, like this series, the characters and their relationships develop so much over the course of the show that the episode might make sense standalone, but you're like, where are these characters coming from? You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That's the problem with that series, because you're like, wow, why does so and so act so differently than in the other episode I saw? That's the issue, even though they are standalone episodes.
Well, and do we feel like we've ended this discussion on general Star Trek and not so much the episode?
And beyond.
Yeah.
I don't know how much of this will become supplemental material or end up on Novas Elitas or something else. I don't know. But it doesn't matter as long as it lands somewhere. And yeah, send. I haven't mentioned this in a long time. I don't know. Send some feedback via Twitter. Send it to Star Trek RBG on X, or just send it to Doctor Who MHC, or just send it directly to me at PULLITT33 on X. I will. Yeah, that's the most likely way I'll see it. But yeah, I'd like to hear what people think we're doing right or doing wrong. And we've already teased that eventually we're going to do something besides just random standalone episodes of Star Trek, other Star Trek related things. If you have an opinion, I'm just curious what Star Trek related thing you'd like to hear on the podcast.
Well, I'm very intrigued about all that. I'm curious what you guys said in those previous episodes. So I'm curious what that's hinting at.
Until then, closing out the show today, this is Eric.
And this is Caleb.
And until next time,
may the wind be at our backs.
Beware Romulans bearing gifts.
Do you remember the new closeout tagline?
No. Oh, you've been using that? What was it again?
We've used it in like 2 episodes now. Let me just make sure I quote it correctly, even though I'm pretty sure I have it word for word down. I'm pretty sure it's "May the wind be at." I always forget if it's our backs or your back. I know it's not. Oh, May the wind be at our backs. So you can say it however you want to say it.
Sure. May the wind be at our backs. How's that?
There you go. Yeah, that's my new one. In the last episode we recorded for RBG, I think that's where I explained offline to Carl and company. Because the first time I didn't explain it, but the second time we used it, I did. Or where it came from, because it's obviously a quote from something Star Trek.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah, well, definitely somebody on the panel really enjoyed that episode.
It would have been me if I was there.
And I can tell you it was absolutely not Sean, because according to him, he can't get into like hardly anything animated, including Miyazaki films and other stuff.
Yeah, if I'd known that he was coming to it, I would have suggested something else, because Sean's almost never a good fit for animation. So
it's fine. I'm gonna get him with something. I mean, he does like Grave of the Fireflies. That might be like the only movie I can think of off the top of my head.
And you'd probably still have to drag him to rewatch it.
Oh, you have to drag me to rewatch it.
That's
Even
fair.
though I think it's an amazing film.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of Sean's posts about Nosferatu, and that would have been one too that I would have told him, you don't need to see this. You're not going to enjoy it. Sometimes you can just tell with Sean when you see a certain movie, it's like, that's not up his alley.
He gave a short take on it, which was, technically he thought it was, all great, top notch, technically speaking. But he said the rest of it, he said, it's the same as we've seen before. And I said, you mean in reference to like previous Nosferatu movies? And he said, yeah. So his short take was there was nothing new, just good technical filmmaking.
Well, not technically true. There was one big addition that kind of changes the whole scope of the movie and the point of the whole movie.
I've never watched any full version of Nosferatu. I've only seen pieces of a couple different ones.
Oh, not even the original one? Oh, wow. Gotta check that out.
No. But I still want to see this one, and it bothers me that one non-movie friend has saw it at opening day, and I'm like, what the hell?
I think it'd be worthwhile to check out the 20s one before. I think it makes the movie different.
I won't do it. I mean, you may be right, but I know I won't do it. I'll probably watch the newest one first, and then if I like it, then it will assuredly make me go back to the original. It's not that that's what I want to do. It's just I know how I am with these things.
Oh, but then the 20s one will be so informed by this one for you, and I feel like it works better if it's the opposite. But what can you do?
Yeah, but I accept that with certain things. Like I said, my brain has its own algorithm that's different for different things, and a lot of times there's no science to it. It's just the way it is. Because there are certain things where I just tell myself, no, I have to watch this earlier version of this thing. But there's no rhyme or reason. It's just my gut knows. And I just have to go with it. It doesn't mean my gut's right. It's subconscious. Like when I decide to enforce these self-imposed rules and when I don't. But yeah, every time Isaac is like, because it's basically like random, like what we may talk about on a Monday, and just lately, especially since he's sort of starting to talk about Star Trek now. I mean, on the podcast and everything, I just always want to do Star Trek now, because it started with let's do more Transformers was his suggestion, but I'm just like, no, let's just do more Star Trek. I just want to watch it. And I don't even care what series it is. And I'll eventually get through Discovery. I will I have to be a completionist.